Welcome to Rick's RC Flying channel. In this video, we're going to look at now getting the wing prepared for covering. This is the Sweet and Low project, and we're just going to be doing a little bit of light final sanding, and we're going to check the wing to make sure that it is ready to accept the covering. Now, one of the best tools you can use in preparing your wing that you're not going to see anything showing up on the fabric covering that you really don't want to see is your hands. Simply take your fingers and run it all over the wing, over all the joints. If you feel any irregularities, then you can address them. For example, these rib caps, take your finger and just check over them. If they feel perfectly smooth, it's going to look great when you cover it. If you feel like a ridge there, that will show up when you do the fabric work. And even though, we're playing around with this sport aircraft, uh, trying to make it a standoff scale World War I looking airplane, well, definitely during that time, they built the airplanes as quickly as they could, and they sure didn't spend much time finishing them because they had to get them in the air. So if you want a little more of an authentic look, uh, you don't have to take it to that hot rod finish. Now, there are airplanes I've built where, it was all about the finish. If you want to take it to that level, you can use a technique called candling, where you will take a light and move your light around, and you'd be amazed by the different angles of the light shining. Even though it felt incredibly smooth, you'll see little irregularities. It could be a little dent, a little void. Then you can address it that way. But I mean, generally, I don't think, I'm going to take it quite to the candling stage because it is going to be a World War I airplane. So we're going to do a little bit of sanding, and then we're going to cut the fabric out and then start preparing the wood to accept the fabric.
So now I'm simply cutting the fabric out to size. Now you're going to need a minimum of 1 inch of extra overlap, but I personally prefer 2 inches. Sometimes I even use 3 inches, particularly around wingtips. It just gives me a little more to handhold. I mean, at the end of the day, you'll decide what you're comfortable with. So now I'm just doing one last final sanding. I happen to be using 320 grit sandpaper, and as I'm sanding, I'm also feeling with my hand, looking for any possible irregularities in the smooth texture of the wing. Once I'm totally satisfied with it, then the wing is ready for covering. Now I'm applying the nitrate dope to seal the wood. I'm using 3 parts of nitrate to 1 part of nitrate thinner. Now make sure that anytime you are using any kind of dope product, whether it's butyrate or nitrate, you use a very well ventilated area. It's even recommended to wear a mask. I happen to have multiple exhaust fans running right now, and actually even have a door that's open. So it's a very well ventilated environment, but it is something definitely to consider. Of course, you can always do it outside as well, weather permitting. Now, after the first coat's applied, it takes about 20 minutes for it to dry in a room environment of about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I then take 320 grit sandpaper and sand the entire surface area, top and bottom, to remove that fuzzy, grainy feel. After you've completed that, the wing will have a very definite, smooth feel, which is the first indication that the wood is beginning to seal. Now, once you've completed the sanding, just take a cloth. You may even want to slightly dampen it and just go over the entire wing just to remove any potential residual dust that may have accumulated. Now we're going to apply a second coat of nitrate to the entire surface area of the wing, top and bottom. Now, I thought I'd mention that there is a part one to the fabric covering where it just goes into the individual steps with a little more detail, and I'll provide the link to part one in the descriptions. So after the second coat is dried, we use the same procedure, sanding with 320 grit paper, and now I'm simply removing any potential dust that may be on the wing. And you will definitely feel the wing has a very smooth texture. The wood is really now sealed, and we're preparing it to apply the Stix-it, which is going to be the adhesive that we're going to use to attach the coverall fabric. Now the Stix-it is just being applied, as you can see, on the perimeter of the entire wing airframe. So the trailing edge, the wingtip edge, and the leading edge. And I do roughly about an inch, maybe an inch and a half, as you can see, as you apply it. Now you do it reasonably thick, so at least it has like a wet, glossy look to it, and that would be about the right amount. Now I'm using the Stix-it straight out of the can, although if the can was previously opened and it's been sitting for a rather long period of time, it may potentially thicken up. If that is the case, you can thinnen it slightly with buritate thinner, but ever so slightly, because you don't want to thinnen it too much, because then you may compromise the adhesive characteristics of Stix-it. So now we're applying the Stix-it to the top surface of the wing, and as you can see, just going around the outer edges. Now we're going to be covering the bottom of the wing first, and you'll notice I'm also applying Stix-it around the servo mounting cover, because the fabric needs to be attached around that perimeter, because we're going to be cutting out an opening for the servo. If we don't use the Stix-it there, then the fabric will be loose around that area. So it's very important that wherever you're going to make cutouts, that you apply the Stix-it in that area as well. If you ever want to remove any of the Stix-it from any area, you can use Buritate thinner or even lacquer to wipe it away, which is what I'm doing here.
So the Stix-it has dried, and we're going to do the bottom of the wing first, and that's what we normally do. That way, when we put the fabric on the top surface, we get a nicer, cleaner overlap. It's nice when the top fabric overlaps the bottom fabric by the leading edge and trailing edge. I've also decided to, because it's such a big wing, and particularly the top side, because it has a dehedral, trying to work the fabric in there, it makes more sense to cut it down the middle and then work with two separate pieces. So I did apply Stix-it um, not only on the trailing and leading edge and the wingtips, I also put some Stix-it across the middle to facilitate doing it in two halves. And as I talked about before, having really sharp scissors, it's really works well. I'm getting a really clean cut here. So, if you want to avoid the fraying of the fabric, as I talked about before, go, super sharp scissors, if it means buying a new pair and dedicating it to the fabric. So we're basically going to do it in more or less in 2 halves. So I'm just waiting for this to come to temperature. So now I'm increasing the temperature of the iron, and you can see here, there's that little indice, and you can see the temperature now rising. We're just going, coming up to 180 degrees. And I'm going to be looking for about 225, 230 to activate the Stix-it to the Koverall fabric. I went a little too high, so I'm playing with the rheostat and just monitoring this thermometer here. It's very handy. I used to know what the number setting was, but it's I basically forgot. So anyways, it does depend also on your shop temperature. So it's a good idea to always verify with the thermometer.
So now we're going to apply the fabric to the wing, and simply take your iron and lightly go over the fabric where the Stix-it was applied. Now the reason I use around 225, 230 degrees is we only want to activate the adhesive, in other words, the Stix-it. If you use a temperature much higher, particularly 300 degrees or more, the coverall, in other words, the fabric, will begin to shrink. And that's not what we want happening right now. All we want to do is adhere the fabric to the outer perimeter of the wing frame. Now, as I move the iron, with the other hand, I pull out any wrinkles that are in the path of the iron. Notice we're ironing right down the trailing edge. Stix-it was applied to that surface area as well. Now that the fabric is secured to the trailing edge, we're going to begin ironing the leading edge. Now as we do that, with my other hand, I'm actually pulling the fabric, trying to eliminate as many wrinkles as I can. If you look at the wing panel that I'm working on, you can tell quite a few of the wrinkles have been pulled out compared to the other side. Now we're going to work on the wingtip, and I pull the fabric down with one hand and then apply the iron to where the Stix-it has been applied on the edges. And I do that along the entire wingtip. Placing the iron on top of the fabric is beginning to help remove some of the wrinkles. We'll be removing all the wrinkles with the heat gun. Now, to remove some of the wrinkles that are in the fabric, there's basically two methods. You can continue using the iron, although you'll have to set the temperature to about 300 to 350 degrees. Gently glide the iron over the fabric, particularly where the wrinkles are. Now, if you're new at this, it's probably the safer way to go. Now, never have the iron stationary. Always keep it gliding over the fabric. Now, I'm using a heat gun, which is my personal preferred method, although you have to be very careful with the heat gun because it's so much hotter. So you'll always have to keep it moving as well and never get it too close to the fabric or you may risk melting through the fabric. Now, don't over shrink this panel because the top side doesn't have any fabric yet. So the risk is, depending on the kind of wing structure, if you over shrink one side, there may be a risk of warping the wing. So I kind of wait till the fabric is applied top and bottom and then equally shrink the panels, particularly when I'm looking for that tighter look. Now we'll repeat the same procedure on this wing panel. And as we do the leading edge, we'll be pulling the fabric. And then when we do the wingtip, we'll be pulling the fabric as well. And you'll see a lot of the wrinkles will disappear when we're done. The remaining wrinkles will all be removed with the heat gun. Now we're going to have to secure the fabric to the servo panel openings. And you can see we take the iron and activate the Stix-it. This way, when we cut the opening, the fabric will be properly secured. A common complaint is that when it's time to trim the fabric, that it's difficult, it frays and it's difficult to cut. However, a trick I use is I take nitrate and I wet the fabric about an inch where it's going to be cut. And once it's dry, take your X-Acto knife and you'll find that you'll end up with no fraying whatsoever and a very precise, clean trim cut. So now we're covering the top part of the wing and it's done exactly the same as the bottom of the wing. So I'm applying the nitrate on the leading edge area and this will facilitate the trim cut. But I'm also putting the nitrate right on the leading edge because the top fabric is overlapping the bottom fabric and this creates a better bond. So you can remove the wrinkles with the iron. As you can see, you just gently glide it over the fabric and particularly focus wherever the wrinkles are. Now that the wing is covered, both top and bottom, I'm going to do a final heat shrinking on all sides. Now that we're finished applying the fabric covering to the wing, we're going to start filling the weave of the fabric. And what I'm using is nitrate dope, and I use 50% nitrate and 50% nitrate thinner. And so it really flows and smooths out well, although be very careful and apply it sparingly. Don't oversaturate the fabric because we don't want it to drip through the fabric onto the other side because that will affect the final finish. Now I had to close my door and that's why I am wearing a mask, plus I'm covering a fairly big area with the nitrate. Now I still have my exhaust fans running and a window that is open and that is circulating quite a bit of new fresh air into the shop. But you know, when you're doing an area as big as a wing like this, it's highly advisable to be wearing a mask. Now, with every subsequent coat that you put on, the risk of it dripping through the fabric is minimized. Now, the nitrate will dry very quickly. By the time you get to the other end of a wing, especially this size, where you started will feel dry already. Once the entire wing is pretty much dry, you can put a second coat on and then let it dry overnight. Then the subsequent coats, after each one, I let that dry overnight. I also sand between those coats with 400 grit sandpaper. Very lightly, I go over once. Give it a quick wipe in case of any dust. And be careful when you get to any of the edges that you don't put too much pressure with the sandpaper because we don't want to cut through the fabric. Now, the number of coats you'll end up applying will strictly depend on the look you're after. In other words, how much of the weave you want to be able to see with the final finish. Once the top side is dry, flip the wing over and repeat the process on the bottom wing. Now you normally require a minimum of 2 coats of nitrate on both sides.
I'd like to share something with you with regards to the adhesive that I use to attach the fabric to the sweet and low wing. You saw that I used a product called Stix-it, and a very good product. I've used it for years and years, and I was kind of running low on it, and I thought, well, it's time to get another can. And to my surprise, it has become rather expensive. This is a 1 pint can, 16 fluid ounces, which is about $48 US. And although it does go a long way, of course, depending on what size your model is and how much fabric work you're doing, but I like to share with you there is an alternative. Now, I've used this product many, many times for years as well, and it's called Polytack. It's a polyfiber product. Now, this is a real aircraft fabric cement, and this is a 2 pint can, which is 32 ounces versus a 1 pint 16-ounce can. And this comes in at $24 for twice as much. So if you were to compare half, in other words, 1 pint to 1 pint, it would be $12 versus 48. So that's a rather significant difference. Actually, I'll be starting to use this again. Now, the way they apply it on real airplanes is that they take the product and they apply it, and while it's wet or just starting to get tacky, they then take their fabric and place it on, and of course wearing gloves, they then basically massage it onto their frame. Now I do it slightly differently. I found out I can use this the way I did with Stix-it, and I'll just show you that. And what you do is you take the Polytack and you just apply it just like you did with Stix-it, and just, you know, that it has that wet glossy look to it. Okay, and my shot is a little bit on the cooler side, so it's going to take about 15 minutes or so for it to dry. So we'll let that happen and we'll come back and I'll show you how I use it. So about 15 minutes has gone by and it's basically has dried, and you apply it the same way as Stix-it, and I use still 225, 230 degrees on the iron, and simply place your fabric just like you did on the model over the area that you applied it, flatten it out a bit, and then just iron it on. And there you go. It's really on there. It's very, very strong. Of course, they use it on real airplanes, and a great alternative. So I thought I'd share that with you. And by the way, I purchased this from Aircraft Spruce. So um, I thought I would just share that there's an alternative to using this adhesive.
Now, as one of the last final steps in completing the wing, I like to smoothen out and basically fill the center section where the two fabric panels meet. So there's a line that's created there, and I like to fill that. Now I'm using Blaze Glaze epoxy filler, and you notice I mask off a straight edge, and I'll be applying the filler, smoothing it out, and well before the epoxy settles, make sure you remove the masking tape. And then once it hardens, then I feather it within the wing panel. The idea of the masking tape creating a straight edge, when you go to feather it, it just looks so much better than if you had a random edge. Of course, the top center section is actually hidden within the fuselage when the wing is mounted. It's just one of those idiosyncrasies. I just like to have a very finished look to the wing. Now I will be doing the bottom, which is of course exposed and visible. And by the way, what I use as an applicator for any of the fillers I use is an old credit card. And what I'm doing right now is just creating a new edge because over time they kind of wear out the edges, and you just snip a little section off and you're good to go. So the bottom section has been filled, and again, you can see the straight edge as a result of the masking tape, and now I'm just feathering it into the rest of the wing. One thing I like about Blaze Glaze, you'll notice how the filler just simply drops to the table. It really never really floats around much in the air. So that's a kind of a nice thing compared to some fillers.
Well, I hope you found the video on covering the wing on the Sweet'N helpful. If you have any questions or comments, I always appreciate it. If you like the video, please select like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.